Welcome, friends, to the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we are off, but releasing a From the Vault episode, formerly a Patreon exclusive, for the NeverEnding Story 2, the sequel to the much-beloved children's film NeverEnding Story, which we covered on the main feed. Mikel Ende, author, famously hated the adaptation, but we had a lot of fun with both the book and the adaptation, and then we wanted to cover 2 because it covers like a lot of what happens in the second half of his novel that got omitted from that original film. So yeah, this was a fun one, even though we didn't ultimately end up loving the movie too much. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I mean, it's just good to get full context, I think, for this stuff and know, because when you're talking about NeverEnding Story, there's plenty of people I'm sure that have seen 2 that bring the baggage of that film into that conversation. So, you know, I like knowing the full story now, and you know, seeing an attempt to create that ending Mikel Ende had in his book, but I think if I remember correctly, there's some significant differences.
Right, differences. I think this is also an example of just because something might have even good practical effects doesn't mean we're going to like it. You know, as much as we are prone to liking stuff like that, that wasn't enough to save this movie. We get into all the reasons why. So yeah, hopefully you can enjoy that. We do have our next episode, like a proper episode, is going to be on Rashomon. And the story that it was adapted from in The Grove, which we'll be talking about, and then looking at this, you know, iconic film, which I've never seen. I don't know if I made that clear, but I've never seen this movie. Yeah. So I'm really excited.
What's funny is that like everyone has seen the influence of this film, though.
Right.
Like once you watch it, you're gonna be like, oh my god, all these things that we're referencing Rashomon, I now can see the connective tissue.
Absolutely, man. You know I love it when I get those connective tissues and I can start to see the lineage of like how things came to be. Like I'm excited for that. Absolutely. And then also, if that's not quite your thing, or even if it is, we're going to be following it up with Pinocchio, the Guillermo del Toro adaptation that just came out and is up for a bunch of awards, I think.
I have been holding off watching it because I so badly want to. It's stop motion, it's everything I want, and it's Guillermo del Toro, so I can't wait to see it.
There's also like a Pinocchio video game adaptation that looks Souls-like. Have you seen this trailer?
No.
It's supposed to be.
That sounds cool.
Oh no, dude, it looks so cool. You have to look into it. It's called like The Life of P or something about P. As in Pinocchio, and it's Pinocchio inspired, but it just looks like a Dark Souls game. It's so cool.
I'm in, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to come out this year. Anyway, I'm very excited for that. One last appeal. If you are interested in suggesting something for us to cover, we are going to be coming up on a quarterly project, probably shortly after following Pinocchio. And if you'd like to get your suggestions in, get them in early, go to our Patreon. It'll be the pinned post at the top. Comment your suggestion and then make sure to like any other suggestions you see. And then we'll end up taking the top 4 and putting it on a dedicated poll once it gets closer to time. So we'd love to have your suggestions on there while it's a wide open field. All right, so here's that sequel to a beloved film that we didn't end up loving. But I did want to say, if you are curious about a sequel to a beloved children's film that we did end up liking, we also have out on Patreon our latest on The Wizard of Oz 2.
Return to Oz.
Return to Oz. And we actually did end up liking that a lot. That is what like this movie wished it was. And unfortunately fell shy of that. But that would be an interesting comparison to like listen to this episode and then listen to our latest on Return to Oz. Because in some ways they're kind of similar movies. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy.
So this month we're going to be talking about George Miller, not Mad Max George Miller, and his sequel of the NeverEnding Story. Okay. The NeverEnding Story 2, The Next Chapter is what this one's called.
Too bad it's not the other George Miller.
I know, right? Could have been way more badass. We could have had like fucking Australian desert in like cars and stuff.
Yeah. No, this is not that, and is a very different sort of movie.
Yeah. Let's start off by just saying this is a bad movie. And like I like to be the person who's positive for films a lot, and I like to give the benefit of the doubt. I was finding it difficult to find things to like about this movie, which isn't usually the case.
Yeah, and like we talked about how we don't like coming on these recordings and bashing things, and every movie has fans. You know, I'm sure there are people who have fond memories of watching this probably when they were kids. That I think would be the my guess for if anybody has any affection for this movie, it probably hit them at a time in their life where they could just buy into the magical world and liked going back to NeverEnding Story, Fantasia, and enough of that makes it positive. But as an adult watching it for the first time, it was pretty awful and hard to hold my attention.
Yeah, I felt that this movie was a shining example of not really respecting your audience. Even they're making a kids movie, they know they're making a kids movie, and then not having the respect to be like, kids are smart, and just sort of giving the most like sort of meandering basic plot line with some really wonky looking characters. Some familiar friends come back. They might look a little different than before, but
yep. Which is odd. I know that, I know why it happens, but it is difficult when everybody has been recast. It immediately makes it feel like this, cut rate version of the other film.
I just, to me, it almost would have made more sense to just make this second half of the story be like his kid or something, like Bastian's kid or something like that,
right?
Somewhere down the line, so you could explain away, because it was extremely distracting.
Yeah, I do think this is a good example of why this second half of the novel didn't get adapted, because a lot of the story just doesn't work very well. It clashes with what comes in the first half. It's a lot of the stuff that I didn't like about the book, and it focuses solely on that for this film. Not that I hated it in the book. It's like my it's not the stuff that stands out to me. It's not the stuff I remember from reading that book. And it's not the stuff I remember fondly, at least. I think it's a good reminder of why sometimes less can be more, and why I think the original NeverEnding Story film would have suffered if they had tried to keep this stuff in there, I think.
I could feel them like reusing sets many, many times, and like going back, like destroying a set so that it would look different. And like, it just felt like they spent the bare minimum amount of time on trying to create an interesting story, and more just sort of like cash back in. Like, it just felt like to me they were just trying to bring back Falcor, bring back Atreyu, and send them on an adventure. But also, I don't know, some of the stuff really sticks out to me, like defeating the villain by wishing for her to have a heart or something like that is so base level.
Oh yeah, that was
climactic
bad. That was
moments.
Cringy.
Like, it doesn't get much more basic than that. And to me, it's just like time could have been taken to change it from, they clearly did change it from the original work,
for sure,
and change it for the better, and try to figure out how to break this story and make it something that's its own, but also still connected to the original. And to me, this just literally felt like they wanted to just get something out that was a sequel to the first one because of the success. And I actually have something here I'd like to read.
Okay.
So the film was to begin production soon after the release of the first film's success, to cover the remaining second half of the novel that the previous film left out. Production was delayed for 6 years, though, due to Michael Enda's suing Warner Bros. Over his hatred of the first film and the way it turned out. Enda felt that this adaptation's content deviated so far from the spirit of his book that he requested that production either be halted or the film's title be changed. When the producers did neither, he sued them and subsequently lost the case. Enda called the film a gigantic melodrama of kitsch, commerce, plush, and plastic.
And that's talking about the first one.
Yeah, and if those are his thoughts about the first movie, I can't even imagine that he cared to comment about the second movie. And, the fact that he didn't sue them again over the fact that they were using the NeverEnding Story title and everything. I guess once you've lost once, it's not a great... He didn't think he could win another lawsuit, but...
I don't know. I mean, it sounds like you didn't see anything specifically about this one, but I did note that his name appears in the opening, credits for this film, which is not the case in the other one. So for whatever reason, he was okay with that. It was the second half of the book that he really, really wanted to be adapted. I don't know. It's sometimes like, authors aren't the best judges for what makes a great adaptation for their own work. And, sometimes they're just happy to see it, period. And maybe the quality doesn't matter as much.
Right. It's interesting to think that he maybe realized after the lawsuit that it was out of his hands, and he just needed, if he had his name on it, he could at least see some sort of the profits or something like that. And I assume in some way they must have paid him something.
If anybody has any details on that, let us know on how he actually felt about this adaptation.
So let's try our best here. Was there anything that stood out to you that you did like? What were things that worked for you, if anything?
certain effects. So I'm gonna hit with another criticism, but like I was like, this is an example of like physical practical effects are not always great. Some of this stuff just looked silly or it looked cheap.
What specifically? Like the giants and stuff?
Well, some of the costumes, the big bird costume I thought looked pretty bad the whole time. Yeah, the giants were weird because they were very inconsistent with how they would move. Sometimes they were extremely stiff, other times they would walk, and like it just like never passed the smell test for like something believable, and instead it always just felt fake. And yeah, some of it was just overly goofy. You could tell that it was like plastic or what have you. Like you could see the fakeness of it. And it's tough because like I think it is kind of a fine line because a lot of the stuff at first glance looks very similar to the effects in the first movie, but there is a fine line that makes a lot of what happened in the first movie work and a lot of what happens here not work.
Yeah, it's interesting because we see characters like Rockbiter and Falcor again, and I think those were two that you could say looked, better than the rest of the effects. I think, but and something specific, Falcor's eyes in this movie
are red.
I found to be like really different.
Yeah,
and I couldn't tell if I liked it or not. I thought that it kind of added something.
I don't know why. It was a weird choice. Like, why does he have bright red eyes like
red
that?
eyes now? Yeah,
I don't think he had that in the first movie. I don't remember.
I don't think he did either. Yeah, and Rockbiter, clearly they had built something. They had to build it again, something that looked just like the original Rockbiter, and it didn't seem like it was obviously the person was just in one location, moving the head around, maybe the arms a little bit, that kind of thing.
It's not like Rockbiter looked amazing in the first movie. So, like I said, it's kind of a fine line.
There was a certain sense of scale that I think worked better in the first one in comparison to this. It just felt like the same shot over and over in this movie, and in the original, I remember seeing like a lot more of the sense of scale against other characters and things like that.
In particular, the Rockbiter scene in the first film, one of the things we praised was when he bites into the stones and it comes raining down and it actually looks dangerous. Like there's these boulders flying out of the sky. Here they have a similar moment where he bites into some stone and then it just rains on this like rock baby, and the rock baby like just looks upset, and like you have no sense of scale because you don't know how big the rock baby is. It's not one of our characters we care about. It looks kind of silly itself. So I agree. There's just a bunch of stuff like that doesn't work. But it's not just the effects. I also think a lot of the acting, whether due to the actors themselves or direction or writing or a combination of all three, it just felt stiff and not emotionally resonant. So often, especially with Bastian, he'd be trying to convey some sort of emotion, and it always felt like either overdone or underdone, or something was just a little bit off from the moment.
Yeah, I can specifically remember this moment where he was supposed to be, it was when the Atreyu fell, and he's looking down at Atreyu in malice, like he's angry and kind of hates him.
Yeah.
And then has this moment where he like needs to switch emotions to be like, so he's like scared, then mad, then sad or something, and regretful. And like he's trying to convey all three at a time, and it's it's not an easy thing to do, but the way that it comes out and the scene just did not work for me.
It's incredibly tough, and we've talked a lot about child acting on the podcast because a lot of films, have to employ it, and to various levels of success. It's a hard thing for these young actors to do well, especially complex emotions like what you just described, like going between three different extreme emotions and having it feel believable and not like it kind of does here, where it's kind of silly and over the top. That's really hard to do, and it's a big ask, and I think you have to have a director who is patient and knows how to work with a child and can help them get that performance. And so I don't want to just completely put it at the feet of the actor, but I think that there's a lot that goes into making these performances work that just wasn't present here.
Yeah, and I think you set me up perfectly for something that I noted and then something I found in my research. So the thing that I noted was so much of this feels like, some of the costuming and some of the things feel like television to me. Feels like the fast-paced nature of television. You have to shoot things so quickly. You don't have time to get your shots perfect. People have to, you don't have quite as many takes because things need to get done.
Like soap opera acting can be like this sometimes, right?
It's got to go quick. You got to go quick. And so then I just found myself thinking about that, but I was like, it's a sequel to a pretty massive movie. I assume that they had the budget and the time, and I read as labor rules regarding child actors limited their working schedules, George Miller decided to only rehearse scenes once before filming and maximize the time with the children on set by shooting with as many as 3 cameras on every scene. This created a problem as Miller's fear of falling late wound up making the film so ahead of schedule that the effects team had not completed the necessary work for later scenes.
Interesting. So there was some sort of production stuff that was adding to this problem, it sounds like.
Well, to me, not having the rehearsal explains the performances.
Yeah, it does.
And, and then not having performance means that you're not getting to do camera rehearsals, things like that can help you do more dynamic camera movements and things like that that'll add some production value. And it's going to turn into something that looks like something you could see on TV.
Yeah.
And I went through his filmography, and surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, he directed mostly television up to this point, and then kind of went back and did more television after this.
Okay.
And there's nothing wrong with doing television, during that
some
era.
Amazing television directors out there, so
right.
Yeah.
And I think that people especially in this era, people would stick their nose up at a television director versus a film director. There's a difference, but that's not to say people didn't create some amazing television. And but I can just see sort of the attention to detail that somebody who's used to the super fast paces wants to get in and get out, make their day, and sort of some of the sacrifices that can come from that all throughout this movie.
So you were mentioning what was good here, and I do want to. There's a general theme that was present in the work and is present here that I think is good, and I think is explored in a way that is interesting, and that's how stories affect us and how they change us and how important that is to our lives and how our lives themselves are stories, right? That all gets touched on. There's a refrain that comes back where it's we're all a part of a never-ending story. And whether or not it's always delivered in a way that is powerful is, clearly it isn't. But the line itself is good and the idea is smart. There's another part where I think it's the bookstore owner, Coriander, says have you ever read a book again? It changes or something like that. And I liked that because of course that is very true, but also false, right? And false in the sense that it's the same book, it's the same words, it hasn't changed, but you have changed. And maybe it's a little trite, but I think that is something that readers will experience, revisiting things, especially, that's something I've noted on this podcast, reading something to cover it versus I read this 10 years ago or 15 years ago and how it struck me then versus what it strikes me as now. And it can be kind of incredible, the difference that can make. So there is truth there, and sort of that nebulous nature of story and our interaction with it is some of the most interesting ideas from the second half of Enda's novel, and they are present here in a way that justifies sort of the existence of this film in some ways, but I just wish it had been pulled off better.
Yeah, I mean, I can get on board with that too. There are things that I think are carryovers from the original work and from the first movie that are kind of continuing along the same path, but just didn't necessarily hit as squarely. So I mentioned at the end of our first movie episode of the NeverEnding story, I always found it weird that Bastian doesn't have a moment to bring the book back to Coriander, because it felt like a full circle kind of thing to do. And then here we get the implication that he did bring it back, and then he steals it again.
Yeah.
He just has to steal it again.
It felt like they were rehashing several moments from the original story just to be visual reminders or
there's
what have
the
you.
stuff with his dad not caring about him and stuff, and you're like, wait, I felt like there was a little bit of this that was kind of handled in the first. I know it wasn't directly, but it was implied. But it turns out that there's no growth between the characters.
They're kind of having it both ways with Bastian too, because he clearly has been to Fantasia before, but we don't get any sense that this is the same kid who went through it all. He flew on Falkor in Earth. What happened to all that?
He's afraid to jump from the high dive and everything. He's looking for courage, and you're I felt like that was kind of implied that he got that at the end of the first movie.
He almost seems surprised about the never-ending story until he isn't,
Yeah.
It really felt like they were trying to play it both ways. They're like, oh, for people who never saw the first one, let's kind of introduce it like it's all new to him. But then also for the people who did see the first one, we want to like do a wink and a nod towards it, but have the character basically be a blank slate.
Yeah. I don't want to read a full synopsis here because I feel like we can kind of go through this somewhat chronologically. But So we've kind of talked about that opening scene at this point, and then we get into Fantasia and we meet Nimbly. We get
that's that bird, the Birdman with the really, really, I don't know. I just did not like the design of his outfit.
How did you feel about him nearing the end when he like became he turned?
Totally saw it coming. As soon as he saw the first memory, I was like, okay, so he's gonna become a convert essentially from viewing these memories. And I don't know, man. It's just having like this human face behind this big beak, and
I definitely thought he was gonna die. I thought that he was because he turned, he was gonna die, and it would be like this heartbreaking moment.
Oh no, we don't get any of that like emotional haymakers that the first movie has. I wouldn't say anything like that really occurs here.
No.
Yeah.
They do deal with the death of his mother a little more, which is, a sad note.
Well, and he's kind of forgetting her, which is sad.
Right. Yeah. And that's sad in itself for sure. But yeah, so another thing that we should definitely talk about is the emptiness. Yeah. Which is this is the villain of this, in the same way that in the first one was the nothing, right?
The nothing, yeah.
So we're just like really rehashing something like that again, because the emptiness is basically the nothing.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess they were trying to touch on, again, this is a sequel. This is like the second half of the same book, so they're trying to link it, but it's like it's different, but not really that different. It just feels odd.
How did Saeed strike you as like the villain?
So I got really strong Wicked Witch of the West or whatever. It felt to me like the director here was like, well, I'm going to lean heavily on
Wizard of Oz.
Yes, thank you. We had like essentially, was it Nimbly is the name of the character? He's Nimbly, he's basically a flying monkey. There's like a scene where he comes in and he's behaving very similarly. He flies out and does her bidding. She's very witch-like. I don't know. It felt like he was drawing a lot of inspiration from that film.
It really does feel that way to me too.
And that is just a clear touchstone, I think, for this director. And I don't know. It's the NeverEnding Story 1 seems so unique and different. And we talked about how it's German and kind of not that typical Americanized version of fantasy that we've seen, and it feels like something really unique. And to take this and instead push it in the direction of a Wizard of Oz, I don't know, it just kind of cheapened everything and made it not like very little felt fresh about this. Yeah,
I mean, totally agree with you there. It did feel like something we've seen 100 times, almost, and all the beats, all the ways that they're able to outsmart the villains and everything. Like I said before, the ending feels so contrived. Like it's just the most like you could have seen it from a mile away. But Atreyu's back. How do we feel about Atreyu being back? And did it not feel like Atreyu to you? Did you feel like?
No, he seemed like almost a different character in some ways. Mm-hmm.
Childlike Empress, same kind of thing. For me.
all been recast. I don't know, man. I'm struggling here. Like, this movie's not good, and it's hard for like every time you talk about something, I'm like, yeah, that was bad. I don't know how to like talk about it in a way that's not just completely shitting on it. But I mean, none of it worked. None of it worked very well. I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, there were moments too, like where some big threat would come up, like the giants. And they would deal with just one. Like there's the whole town's getting invaded by giants. One falls into the acid, and then the threat is over, and everything's fine. And it happens several times in the movie where it's just like they deal with one piece of a larger problem, and then that means that the problem is solved. So like it just on a like base level, the plot wasn't working. Like it was taking shortcuts. It felt like again like it wasn't respecting the audience, right?
I got a couple of weird moments to bring up for you. So you just talked about the giants attacking. There's the moment when he like sort of slides into that hidden compartment on the ship and slides down into that prison with those weird creatures down there.
Place of mysterious plots or something? Or the ship of mysterious plots? Something like that. really weird. It's a group of like 5 or 6 different beings standing around in a circle, and one of them's like a floating lady, one of them's a woman playing a harp, one of them's just like a mud man.
There's also like a volcano man.
Volcano man, yeah. It's there's other like, I think there was a few others that didn't either say anything or were just kind of hanging out in the background. Man, it's weird. That whole town with all the people in their like,
is that Emerald
fancy
City?
looking gowns. It's very Emerald City, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. None of it was as interesting as what we got in the first movie.
Just a really random weird scene for him to just slide into this area, and then the Mudman was so off-putting.
Yeah.
Oh man, really tough to look at. But that was weird. Another one, you talked about like fighting giants, and they get to the point where they get to the palace and they're trying to capture Zaid, and Atreyu has this plan with their warriors or whatever. He pulled all the eggs out, and then these like toys come out and start exploding and killing them and stuff. Like, what a ridiculous moment.
They're like being powered by fireworks, it looks like
incredibly weird. What a moment that was.
And then right after that, or right somewhere in there, he summons a weapon. He's like, "We need a weapon, Atreyu." And then he wishes for a weapon, and he gets the paint can, and then he like sprays one. Like, again, there's multiple giants. He sprays like 1 or 2 in the eyes. One falls over and explodes for some reason, and then Threat over. Like, he looks around, Threat's over, there's no more giants around. Yeah.
Hey, that's how it goes. One of the moments that I found to be extremely aggravating and would have definitely bothered me as a kid is when he's just willy-nilly using the wishes to like create a step per wish.
A new wish per step. I did write that, like, I guess at that point he has no idea that he's losing his memories per wish.
Yeah, but it would just be so much more efficient, right? Yeah. From an efficiency standpoint, like, can you please just ask for an entire staircase at this point?
Yeah. It's very maddening. Clearly what they were trying to do there is, highlight how much he's just wasting these wishes and losing his memories. I did think it was probably necessary to introduce this visual tracking of the memories lost in these little orbs.
I actually kind of like that thing too.
That's kind of clever.
I like that, and like the fluid would drain out, and the orbs would be below, and it just, like you said, a visual representation. Like, I found it to be kind of creepy and weird, and kind of like that.
And I think it's necessary. I think you need that, especially for kids, to like to understand what is kind of a difficult concept to wrap your mind around. Of this, you're losing a memory every time you make a wish, and like you would forget that, but instead we have this visual reminder of like, here's the memories. You can look in them and see what they are as they're going out. None of that's present in the book. And I think it helps here.
I have something else that wasn't present in the book that I want to get your take on. How did you feel about, so there's one thing that I didn't like about this, and that's the fact that like they started to lean really heavily on just like voiceover to explain like what was going on, how Bastian was feeling and all this stuff. And it was done by using Barney, the father, as he's reading through the book. He would sort of let you know what was going on. And I was wondering, other than the voiceover, which I wasn't a fan of, did you like the fact that we got his father to like sort of go into the story? It's different than the book. I just didn't know if it added something.
I mostly did. It did seem like underdeveloped plot line. Like, he doesn't go into the story. He just reads it and kind of follows it until Bastian comes home. He does speak to him, and then at the end, Bastian's like, "Of course I heard you." Although I didn't feel like I saw him hearing him in the story. I don't know. Maybe it was implied or something, but I did kind of want a little more. Like, maybe he goes into Fantasia too. Something, I like the idea of including the father in this, but it felt like they didn't maybe go far enough with it. Also, he doesn't really behave in a way that sold me as like a father whose son is missing.
Right.
Like,
the fact that he kept saying the engineer thing was really bugging me. I was like, you can't do that. You can't just go around saying, I'm an engineer. I see what's what. Yeah. I see something and that's how it is, or whatever. That's how he's trying to explain how he's like this logical thinker. Yeah. And I'm like, oh God, it's not working. And then,
although I will say my father is an engineer, and, he doesn't go around saying that, but it was giving me an interesting nostalgia for being a kid at this time and having a father who's an engineer. And I don't know, like, sometimes it does feel like difficult to explain certain things to people who don't have that sort of creativity on their mind all the time. I don't know. They just think a different way. But that's all just personal stuff I'm bringing in. It's not really, it doesn't really work that well in the movie.
Yeah. Let's talk about Coriander and how, like, you know, that wink and a nod from the first NeverEnding Story that, like, he kind of knew Bastian needed to do is kind of elaborated in this story. It's like Coriander now is, like, orchestrating him coming back and being like, you can't go back into you've already read the story. And when he leaves, he's smiling again. And then Coriander vanishes in like a few hours. The whole story's gone. He's gone. You can't find him anywhere. And I'm like, okay, so are they introducing this sort of situation where Coriander is like a full-on part of the never-ending story? I know he kind of seemed like he was the Bastion before Bastion, like he had gone through and he knows Fantasia really well, but now it seems like he might have been magical all along.
Why does he, how is he able to disappear? Is he a magical being somehow tied to Fantasia? Is he some sort of wizard? I don't know. It's kind of unexplained, but he did. Is that the same actor from the? I was
yes.
trying to figure it out because I think that's like the one person who felt like a through line, which is kind of cool, I guess. I love the shop itself. It does seem to have like a weird spatial problem of they showed this establishing shot of it basically being a, you know, this like very pointed building
corner store.
Yeah, corner store, and he walks in and it's got like it's really wide. And very dark when what we just saw a building that clearly had lots of windows. So
magic.
Yeah,
magical.
It doesn't really line up. It's just like it's a thing that you don't notice when a filmmaker is able to like use some care and make sure that when they're establishing shots line up with the interiors, right? Because of course this happens all the time where the interior is not actually what the interior of what you're showing, but you have to make sure that you sell it that it is, to keep that illusion alive. And it didn't seem like the care was done here to even make that line up. And then, yeah, I mean, the guy himself, I don't know, it's fine. It doesn't really go anywhere, much like many things in this. Like, what are we supposed to take away from all that? What does it all mean? Like,
yeah, I like from the first movie, I always had this theory that he was like Bastion before Bastion. He was the person who picked up the book, engaged with it, was the hero of the story, and then was like passing it on to the next generation. And I think that this kind of, I guess you could still say that in a way, but he also seems magical at this point. Like he disappeared in a day, like a few hours or whatever. Yeah. So there's something magical going on there, whether it's Fantasia power or not.
Yeah, it kind of raises more questions than it answers. And yeah, I like your take on that. I agree. Like I kind of assumed he had at one point read the story and maybe helped him to love stories, and that's why he has a bookshop now. And like, you know, he's become sort of a caretaker for this book because he knows its power. But that doesn't mean he's a magician or whatever, and kind of seems like he is here. Very odd. Also, the how do you feel about Oren sort of transforming and coming out of the book, and then the way like the snake popped out and like hissed at him one time, and like it was I don't know, there was like a certain touch of magic that was unlike the first film.
Yeah, I guess I liked it in the fact that it's so interesting to me because in the story, it all kind of, in the original novel, it all flows together. Like he gets the Oren and then it's used. And like, so in this situation, he had the Oren at the end of the first movie, then put it back seemingly, then put the book back and then came back to it. And then the Oren came out of the book. And it's just all very interesting, I guess, like the ways that it's like, it's contrived to like work. But the effect, you know, just it popping out, you know, I appreciate that for what it was. It was kind of fun. I liked that it did that. The hand going into the book didn't look amazing, but it was what it was. It kind of takes away from, it kind of starts to blur the lines way more of like magic being in the real world. Whereas I think the only real magic we saw from the first one was just Falcor coming into to attack the bullies.
Yeah. I mean, man, and you touched on this at the beginning, but at the end, the I wish you have a heart, or wish you had a heart, or something is like what his final wish is. It's such a weird thing to throw out there. I was like, wait, what? Like I was not expecting him to wish that, and then like of course it works out great, but like what, you know, like what if she's like, I already have a heart? Like what are you talking about? Like
yeah, that could have been the case.
Like, what do you think pumps my blood?
Yeah. Well, it's like the ultimate situation of the hero being so selfless that they're willing to, sacrifice themselves for even the villain who they hate or whatever. And like they ultimately win the day because they're so selfless. And like, I don't know, it just kind of came out of nowhere, like you said. But it's it's out of nowhere. Didn't really see it coming, and yet it's still one of the most like, I don't know, overused kind of cringy endings you could have come up with. And she like blows up and then blasts light everywhere, brings Fantasia back, and then the childlike emperor shows up and she's like, I know how to get you home. You have to jump off a giant watery,
of course, right, to bring it back to the bravery moment of him needing to jump, which, like, I don't know, man, that was I know that gym classes were different back in the day, but that was pretty tough seeing him be like taunted by the entire class. And
well, not to mention, I just thought like I'm thinking like these kids are definitely going to fall off the diving board the wrong way, like forcing kids to jump off the diving board.
It's like you're terrified of heights, but I'm just going to taunt you and we're all going to peer pressure you until you jump off.
I get that probably was kind of realistic for the time.
Yeah.
But like still the idea of being like, you want to be on the swim team, this is diving, not really swimming. But
exactly.
Like,
that's what I was going to say too. I'm like, I want to be on the fucking swim team, not the diving team. They're not going to make me do this. Like, you don't see Michael Phelps doing this dive before he goes and swims the relay.
Yeah, but when the first day of swim class, he had to prove that he could do it. That's all part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, this movie. I mean, I guess it wasn't as bad as Exorcist 2, but it's up there in one of the worst movies we've watched yet. I think it's a bonus episode. I have no desire to see number 3. Personally,
we might have to do it though. We might have to force ourselves to do it. We'll see.
I hope not. I mean, there's other bonus things we could do. So, I don't know if anybody's even going to enjoy this. If you like hearing us in pain, I guess this could be fun to you. But if you have not seen this movie and you're curious, I do not recommend it. I think this movie only exists for kids who desperately want to see more NeverEnding Story at the time. Like, they want to go back to this. And then even then, I think half of them are going to be very disappointed. Maybe the other half would be okay with it. And
that is the one thing that I walk away with too, is like, it's totally for kids. It's not even slightly for anyone else other than like a child.
Only for children. And then if you are really into Mikel Inda's novel and you really wanted to see the second half, you agree with him and you're like, that desperately needed to happen. I can see you wanting to watch this, but then still being disappointed because it's not going to be what you want. Like, it's not what you wanted out of it, but you might be curious enough to see it because you just want to see the representation of some of that stuff. And it does do that, kind of.
Yeah. So we watched it, so you don't have to. But
yeah, hopefully we'll see
I say, what I think about it is watch the trailer. I think you watch the trailer, you're going to get to see Falcor, you're going to get to see the new kid.
That's all you need.
That's all you need. Just see some of that stuff. Rockbiter's back.
Yeah.
And then you can fill in the gaps, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening. This was a fun process. But until next time,
keep adapting.